안녕하세요.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am from Sydney Austin Law Firm. I am in charge of IP litigation. I am partner lawyer. I'm Sharon Lee. My parents are first-generation U.S. immigrant. I was born and raised in the U.S. Actually, I am not fluent in Korean, but the terminology speaking for that is difficult to be spoken in Korean. So I will like to speak in Korean, English.
Defend Your Trade Secret session of BIOPLUS-INTERPHEX Korea 2022. My name is Sharon Lee. I'm a partner in the Intellectual Property Litigation Group at Sidley Austin, and I'll be your chairperson today. Thank you for taking the time to join our session. In the United States, trade secret protection is taking a more prominent role as a means for protecting IP. In our session today, we will make two presentations discussing the increased role of trade secrets and how that may impact Korean and life sciences companies. I will first present on why trade secret protection is growing increasingly prevalent and how U.S. trade secret law can impact Korean companies. And then we'll have Peter Choi, Senior Corporate Counsel of Charles Rivers Laboratories, present on IP and trade secret considerations when working with CROs and CDMOs. Okay, first, just a quick agenda for what we'll be covering in the first presentation. So the first thing we'll talk about is what is a trade secret? Then we'll talk about some US trends in trade secret litigation. Then we'll talk about the Defend Trade Secrets Act, or the DTSA, which is a federal law that was enacted in the US in 2016. And then we'll talk about the impact of US trade secret law on non-US companies, including Korean companies. And then we'll get into some practical tips on how to protect your trade secrets and also how to defend against trade secret claims. So just starting at a very basic level, there are four general categories of intellectual property rights: patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. Now, everyone here is probably very, very familiar with patents, right? It gives you a right to exclusivity for your invention in exchange for publicly disclosing that invention, and in that way it promotes innovation. Today we're going to be talking about trade secrets. Trade secrets are often overlooked, but can be a very powerful tool for IP protection. So as we go through this presentation, I would like you to consider how trade secrets may be an alternative or a complementary tool to patents as part of your company's IP strategy, and also how to protect your company against claims of misappropriation. So what is a trade secret? Trade secrets can be very broad. So we see here, I've highlighted all forms and types of financial, business, scientific, technical, economic, or engineering information. And there are a few examples that are listed up there. But effectively, it's any type of information that meets these two requirements. First, has the owner taken reasonable measures to keep that information secret? And does the information derive independent economic value from not being generally known and not being readily ascertainable through proper means by other people? So in other words, does that information have value because it is a secret? So there's lots of different examples of what could be a trade secret. So customer lists, for example, can be one. Manufacturing processes. Even your failed approaches and experiments could potentially be trade secret information that's protectable. Because in the hands of somebody else, the fact that you tried those approaches and those approaches don't work could save them time and resources from trying those approaches themselves. So sometimes these are called negative trade secrets, and those can also be of value. Unlike patents, which have an expiration term in the US of 20 years, there's no expiration on trade secrets as long as you keep the information secret. So I think the most well-known trade secret, at least in the US, is the Coca-Cola formula. That's been a very long trade secret that's heavily guarded by Coca-Cola and continues to be to this day. All right, just want to take a quick look at the trends in US trade secret litigation. So over the last 10 years, there's been a steady increase of trade secret litigation in the United States. And you can see that in 2016, there was a sharp 20% increase in trade secret litigation. And it stayed steady even through the pandemic at around 1,400 cases per year. So why has trade secret litigation been so prevalent in the United States? Well, first, we're in a globalized market. It's the age of digital data. It's much easier for information to flow. And with the increased dissemination of information, there's an increased risk of that information falling into the wrong hands or being misused. Next, COVID probably had a factor to do with it. In the US, there was something called the Great Resignation that occurred, where millions and millions of employees left their jobs and often left for their competitors. So when these employees leave their jobs, there's a risk that they're taking information from their former employers and bringing it over to their new employer. There's also increased remote work. So a lot more people are working from home due to the pandemic, and they may have lots of confidential information in their homes, which is a less secure environment than when you're in the office. Another reason could be the state of US patent law. There's been a lot of uncertainty around what's called patent eligibility. So in the US, in order to be eligible for patent protection, your patents cannot be directed generally to laws of nature, natural phenomena, and abstract ideas. And courts are the ones who decide whether or not your patent falls into one of these categories. And it's become increasingly uncertain whether the courts will uphold these claims as eligible even though they've already been issued by the patent office. So due to that uncertainty, more companies have been turning to trade secrets to protect their IP. Some additional reasons for why trade secret litigation is so popular: the potential for large damages. These are just 3 examples from the past several years, but as you can see, they're quite large. In 2016, there was a $940 million jury award against Tata Consultancy Services, which is an Indian company. In 2020, there was a $630 million jury award against Hytera, which was a Chinese company. And most recently, in 2022, there was a $2 billion award against Pegasystems. So in reality, a lot of these jury awards, once it goes through the court systems, will likely get reduced. For example, the one against Tata was eventually reduced down to $280 million, but that's still a very large sum of money, and it shows that the risk of exposure is very high. Now, another reason, we saw that sharp increase in litigation in 2016, right? Well, what happened in 2016 is that the Defend Trade Secrets Act was enacted. And that's, we'll call that the DTSA. So what is the DTSA? The DTSA creates a federal civil cause of action for trade secret misappropriation. So before the DTSA was enacted, trade secret law was really governed by individual state law. But the DTSA created a federal cause of action, and it gives access to US federal courts. To establish a claim under DTSA, a plaintiff has to show that it first owns a trade secret, that the trade secret was misappropriated, and misappropriation includes both improper acquisition, disclosure, and use, and that the trade secret implicates interstate or foreign commerce. So this is our first clue into DTSA being applicable to products that are outside, that are, implicate trade secrets that are available outside of the US. There's also a host of available remedies under the DTSA. So damages can include the actual loss to the plaintiff caused by the defendant's misappropriation, and in addition to that, the amount of a defendant's unjust enrichment. So what that means is all of the profits that a defendant earned because of the misappropriation can all be part of a plaintiff's damages award. And it's usually why the damages awards are so high. And you can also include costs that the defendant avoided. So if because they used your trade secrets, they were able to accelerate their entrance into the market by a year, or they were able to not try certain experiments because they already knew from your trade secrets that that didn't work, then all the costs that they avoided in that situation could also be part of your damages award. On top of that damages award, there's also the potential to double it for willful and malicious misappropriation. So it could be the 3 times the damages amount in total. In addition, there's also the availability of ex parte seizure orders and injunctions. So injunctions are court orders that order a party not to, for example, use or disclose a trade secret, or you could also be ordered to stop selling the products that include the trade secrets. In situations where there's a likelihood or there seems to be reason to believe that the defendant will not follow the order, the DTSA does provide the extraordinary remedy of an ex parte seizure order. So that's when a U.S. Marshal can enter and confiscate materials like laptops, hard drives that contain the trade secret information, and take that from a defendant without their consent to avoid further dissemination of that information. Okay, so moving on to the international reach of DTSA, we already saw the first part. The DTSA is concerned about products or services that are used in foreign commerce. Now, what's important about DTSA is that they're not limited to acts of misappropriation that occur in the United States. So misappropriation that occurs outside of the US can nevertheless be subject to a court action in the US under these 2 circumstances. First is if the offender is a US citizen or a US company. That one seems easy to understand. In the second circumstance, even if the offender is not a US entity and the alleged misappropriation occurred outside of the US, you could still be on the hook for trade secret misappropriation if an act in furtherance of the misappropriation was committed in the United States. Okay, so then the question is, what is an act in furtherance of the offense? So we'll first start with what it doesn't mean. So what it does not require is that the misappropriation, the acquisition, disclosure, or use to have occurred in the US. It also does not include an act that occurs before the operation is underway or after it is fully completed. So what that means is that the act in furtherance has to actually have some relationship to the misappropriation. So it can't be some random act that has a connection to the United States 3 years before any misappropriation started or once the misappropriation is complete. I've listed here some examples of acts that courts have found to be in furtherance of an offense. And what you'll see is that even the slightest touch could potentially be an act in furtherance of the offense that subjects non-U.S. entities to U.S. federal courts. So first is marketing, offering to sell, and selling in the U.S. products and services that incorporate the trade secrets. So that's true even if it's done through a non-U.S. website, or even if the marketing or sale or the marketing of the product was just displayed at a trade show in the US. So it doesn't actually require a sale. Accessing trade secret data located on servers in the US, attending meetings in the US to develop and manufacture products that contain the trade secrets, negotiating in the US non-disclosure agreements that provided access to the trade secrets. So that's a situation where company A and B meet in the US to negotiate a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, so that they can exchange confidential information for a potential partnership or business arrangement. Company A receives Company B's trade secrets under the NDA. Company A then uses the trade secrets in a way that's not permitted outside of the US. Company B can still bring suit in the US against Company A under the DTSA because the negotiation of that original NDA that gave them access to the trade secrets was done in the US. Other examples include communicating with US-based employees to learn about trade secrets without disclosing the true intent of why you're asking for that information. Consulting with a US-based company to design products containing trade secrets, again, even if those products were never sold in the US. This last one is also interesting. Obtaining trade secret information from a US-based third party. So a third party is US-based. They obtain Company A's trade secrets inappropriately. Or Company B then receives Company A's trade secrets from the third party outside of the US. Because that third party was in the US and obtained the trade secrets in the US, that makes the claim against the foreign company still subject to the DTSA. So that means that the act in furtherance of the offense doesn't even have to be committed by the company that's being accused of misappropriating, right? It could be another party who performed the act, and you may still be on the hook. So what does this all mean? What is really the impact of the DTSA's extraterritorial applicability? So it allows US trade secret claims, even if the misappropriation occurred outside of the US. So the good news is, for non-US companies, that it provides non-US companies with access to US federal courts against first US entities, but even against foreign companies where an act in furtherance of the offense was committed in the US. So it provides another forum for you to get relief. The downside, though, is that it may also increase risk that non-US companies can be sued in US federal court, right? Because as we saw, acts in furtherance that implicate the DTSA are broad. The other impact is the potential for worldwide remedies. It can have a very big impact on the remedies that are available. So we talked about monetary damages already. Monetary damages, when there's this extraterritorial aspect to it, are not limited to the US profits. So it could implicate your worldwide profits. Also, the injunctions won't just be to products in the US, but courts have implemented worldwide injunctions against foreign companies for the manufacture and sales of the implicated product. So the potential risk can be very high. Okay, switching gears a little bit, I just wanted to also touch briefly on trade secret claims in the International Trade Commission, or the ITC. The International Trade Commission is not a federal court, a federal district court, but it is a separate tribunal for which you can bring a trade secret claim. The ITC's primary purpose is to prevent unfair trade practices that harm US businesses. So they focus on excluding the importation of products that are the subject of unfair practices such as patent infringement or trade secret misappropriation. And it can also apply to conduct that occurred completely outside of the US. Listed a couple differences from district court litigation. One advantage is that it is significantly faster to get to a final decision. So in an ITC case, you can typically get to a final decision between 15 and 18 months, whereas in a district court, you're probably going to be there for 2 to 3+ years. There's no monetary damages in the ITC. You can only get that in district court. But the powerful remedy that's available in the ITC is that if there is a violation, the ITC can issue an exclusion order that blocks importation of goods that are made with the misappropriated trade secrets or the product that infringes the patent. So I've listed here a couple of relatively recent ITC exclusion orders that involve Korean companies that were based on trade secret claims. So the first one was an order that excluded Daewoong Pharmaceuticals from importing Jeuveau product for 21 months. And this was a complaint that was brought by Meditox, which is also a Korean company, and was Allergan's Korean partner for the Botox product. The second one is a recent order that excluded SK Innovation from importing certain lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles for 10 years, with a few exceptions, and that was on a complaint brought by LG Chem. So both of these cases eventually settled, and I'm not making any comment on whether or not the ITC made the right decision here. But the point is that these are very powerful remedies that could have real consequences to these companies. And just for background information, both of these cases involved former employees of the complainant allegedly taking trade secrets over to the respondent. All right, so just getting into some practical tips for protecting your trade secrets. These are not only practical tips, but they can also help your case to the extent that you or your company ever find yourself in trade secret litigation to help your case. So one is, and this may seem obvious, but prominently label your trade secret information as trade secret or confidential. This puts people on notice that this is information that you consider a secret. And the people that are involved could be your employees, potential partners that you have to share information with, contractors. Having that simple header on there is a really easy first step. Next, obligate other parties to maintain the confidentiality of trade secret information. So when you enter into agreements with companies and you have to share your trade secret information with them, make sure there's a confidentiality it's good to make sure that there's a confidentiality obligation in there to show that you're protecting your trade secrets. And sometimes I think when people are meeting, for example, with potential partners for business relationships, there may be some exchange of information there. And oftentimes, companies don't necessarily want to enter into an NDA for those initial conversations. But you have to be very wary, because if you're providing them with your confidential information without any obligation on their part, that could put your trade secret information at risk. The next one is to obligate employees to maintain the confidentiality of information and to implement trainings so that the employees know what it means to maintain confidentiality. Next is to limit internal access to trade secret information. I think the Coca-Cola formula is at any one time only known by 2 executives in the entire company. That's an extreme example, but it's good to limit your valuable trade secret information to just those on a need-to-know basis, for example. Because again, it shows that you've taken reasonable measures to secure that information. So you can restrict access on company-issued computers, for example, so that employees are not able to email out that information through their personal email accounts. You can also put electronic and physical barriers, so permission-based access to certain files or physical locked files and cabinets. Next, ensuring that departing employees don't take company information. So some ways that companies have done this is have the employee sign an acknowledgement saying that they've returned all the company information before leaving. Require the return of all hard copy and electronic documents, hard drives, storage drives, whatever it may be that the employee used. And forensic analysis of a departing employee's company-issued devices. There have been cases where a company will do a forensic analysis of a departing employee's computer, and they find that 3 days before their last day, they emailed a gigabyte of data to themselves or something like that. So these are just ways that companies use to be able to track that information. Okay, and then some tips for defending against claims of trade secret misappropriation. So one way is to demonstrate independent development of a product or information. And sometimes good documentation is that evidence. Next is demonstrating that the alleged trade secret information is actually publicly known. So trade publications, regulatory standards, patents are public. Sometimes that information that a company is claiming is their trade secret might actually be things that are actually available in public resources, which means they're not eligible for trademark protection. Another way is to demonstrate that reasonable measures were not taken to protect the trade secret information. So if a company doesn't take any of the measures that we just discussed to protect that information, that can be used to demonstrate that this is not actually a trade secret. Finally, this is probably easier said than done. Ensure new employees don't bring or use information from prior employers. One way that I've seen companies do this is have the employee, when they join, sign an acknowledgement that they haven't brought anything and they won't use anything. Again, trainings can be helpful. There can also be audits for new employees to ensure that they don't upload or email confidential information from their prior employer. Okay, if there are any questions, we have a few minutes before our next presentation.
그러니까 기업 기밀을 보호하기 위한 이런 미국의 여러 조치들이 미국의 어떤 바이오 산업 활성화에 좀 더 이바지했다고 보시는지 여기에 대한 견해 궁금하고요. 또 한국에서도 좀 최근에 바이오 대기업들이 인력 유출 간의 인력 유출 문제 때문에 소송도 있었고 그랬는데 한국에도 이런 좀 법이나 제도와 뭐 위원회 통해서 기밀을 보호할 수 있는 그런 좀 법적 제도적 장치 도입이 필요하다고 보시는지 답변 좀 해주시면 감사하겠습니다.
So there are two questions from my side. Let me start the first question. So first, in the U.S., it seemingly I believe that a lot of methodologies such as enactment of DTSA or ITC are established to protect the company's trade secret in an effective manner, right? So do you think that it can contribute to the revitalization of the U.S. biopharma industry? This is my first question. And my second question is about in Korean situations. So if Korea has a legal and institutional foundation to effectively protect Korean companies' trade secret and their IP, is that also reliably contribute to the growth of the Korean pharma industry? Because recently we have been witnessing many litigations with regards to this IP and trade secret from the many Korean big pharma, especially the draining of the talent pool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So to address the first question, I would say that I do think that trade secret laws in the U.S. will continue to be effective in protecting biopharma companies and other companies as well. As you can see, there's been some potent remedies that are involved in misappropriation that are available for trade secret misappropriation claims. And I think that'll have hopefully a deterrent effect, but it also protects the existing industries. And I think another thing is that with patent law being the way that it is, it provides a way for companies to protect other aspects of their businesses as well, perhaps in a way that they haven't thought of before. So I think, as I said in the beginning, a lot of companies want to often think of protecting their IP with mostly patents, and trade secrets can be overlooked in many industries, and it provides just another tool for companies to protect their IP. I'm not familiar with trade secret law in Korea, so I can't speak too much to that. But I do think just in general, trade secret protection is an important aspect of IP. And again, it's something that more companies have been and should be focusing on because there's a lot of value in trade secrets. as we saw in the presentation. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Peter because I've eaten into 4 minutes of his time already. Thank you.
That's fine. Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Choi. I am Senior Corporate Counsel for Charles River Laboratories and head of IP. I actually worked at Sidley for many years before joining Charles River, and Sharon actually was just a couple doors down from me in the Washington, D.C. office. I didn't even know you spoke Korean. I do too, but I'm not going to even try. Yeah, this is my third BioPlus conference. The last one I did was completely remote. It's good to do this one in person and to see everyone and to be physically present. I think it provides for a more effective conference. So it's great to be here. It's great to be here in Seoul to make connections and to see old friends and colleagues as well. Before I forget, I just want to thank the organizers of BioKorea and Sidley Austin for graciously inviting me to speak. The Korean biopharmaceutical industry is something very near and dear to my heart. Lots of exciting things going on the global stage with some great recent success. It's truly an honor to be here to speak with you. So this is just an abstract of my talk. I want to provide some more practical discussion on some of the issues relating to trade secrets, particularly for younger and smaller biotech companies. So we can just skip over it in the interest of time. Let me just tell you a little bit about Charles River, in case you don't know, in case you're not sure of who we are and what we do. We are 75 years old. The company was founded in 1947 by Dr. Henry Foster. After veterinary school, he bred, fed, and cared for animals and personally delivered them along the Charles River in Boston, Massachusetts. We are now a global CRO, CDMO. We have a big presence around the world with 110 facilities in 20 different countries. One thing that we're very proud of is our focus on science and our contributions to some life-saving and life-changing therapies. For example, our scientists have been involved in more than 85% of the drugs approved by the U.S. FDA in 2021. What do we do exactly? We provide an end-to-end solution for drug discovery and development companies, big and small. Many are based in Korea. We do that along a portfolio of 5 different products and services, which in very, very broad terms, I've tried to summarize here. Basic sciences, we are the world's leading provider of research animals. In discovery, we're involved with assay development and compound testing. It's a very exciting time with organoids and iPSCs and stem cells. Safety assessment is one of our biggest areas and involves toxicology and safety pharmacology studies in larger animals. We provide clinical support with clinical sample analysis and pathology for clinical trials. And our CDMO business is rapidly expanding to include cell and gene therapy, basically from soup to nuts, all the way from sourcing the cells to process development work and providing supply for commercialization. So before digging deep, again, my talk is geared more towards younger, less established companies. I just wanted to sort of level set on some terms that I'm going to be using throughout the discussion. Intellectual property, it's pretty obvious. It's got a broad definition typically in contracts. It's patent, trademarks, trade secrets, which are a subset of IP. And Sharon explained what a trade secret was. Typically, there's background IP, which is pre-existing IP owned and created prior to the engagement and created outside the activities performed in the study. And so assay protocol or the cell line might be background IP of a company like Charles River. The target of interest might be the background IP of a company. And Sharon also mentioned negative trade secrets, compounds that don't work. That could also be considered IP of the company. Confidential information is basically things that you want to keep a secret. There are different time periods and limitations and restrictions that you put on the use of confidential information in your agreements. There's a concept here of arising IP, which is new IP that is created based on company confidential information, or arising from the CRO CDMO's performance of the study. There's a specific type of IP called a deliverable, and that's basically the study report or technical package that's created by the CRO CDMO. It's the reason why the company comes to Charles River or some other CRO, and that's usually owned by the company. And I just wanted to highlight here third-party IP, this IP that's not owned by the CRO or the startup or whatever the younger company is, but it's going to be a sort of continuing theme in my talk. I think it's something that we all need to be aware of and plan for. So just taking a step back, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the small molecule IP paradigm. So in the past, with chemical compounds as active ingredients, the IP that a company sought to create was relatively straightforward. And the reason for that was because the underlying science was decades old. Basically, medicinal chemists used old techniques like structure-activity relationships to discover new compounds. They tested them in conventional assays, which they had complete FTO with respect to, and making the compound was not always easy, but there were established chemical synthesis routes. The properties of the drug also made the IP landscape a lot simpler. You typically had a single active ingredient with a discrete chemical structure. And what that meant was that there were sort of standard categories of IP that was generated in the small molecule space. You had a composition of matter a composition of matter patent, method of use, method of treatment, formulations. And with respect to third-party IP, that was also a lot more straightforward. You could perform structure-based searching because you had the specific structure. You knew what the established categories of IP were, and oftentimes the regulatory agencies, such as the FDA, provided some help. There's something called the Orange Book in the U.S., where drug sponsors can list all the patents that are relevant to commercializing and using the drug. So in that world, trade secret protections were largely irrelevant. And that's basically because everything could be reverse engineered. You had highly sensitive analytical methods, NMR, mass spec, and there was an adage in the science: if you can draw it, you can make it. So basically, no matter how complicated a structure, there was a way of making it, and the structure was always disclosed. It was disclosed in the label for the drug. And so right here, I've got the structure of an antibiotic drug called fidaxomicin. It's a 15-member macrolide ring, I think with 5 chiral centers, and it's complete. It's found in dirt. And its complete structure was determined, including the stereochemistry, using NMR and mass spec. And so if the information is something that's readily identifiable using analytical methods, it's usually not something that's subject to trade secret protection. In addition, confidentiality restrictions were less critical. And that's because oftentimes the key information was the structure of the compound, and that information could be withheld from collaborators and partners. You could just give them a test tube with white substance in it without identifying any information about the formula. In addition, the information was ultimately published, typically in patents and journals. You also had regulatory requirements. Again, there's a requirement that you publish the structure in the label. And so, what that resulted in were time-limited obligations. 7 years, 14 years are some examples. So the advent of cell and gene therapy and biologics changed all of that. Very promising medicine, lots of promise. The complexity in science and rapid pace of innovation has basically given rise to an IP-rich landscape. A lot of R&D going on in this area, unlike small molecules, different types of modalities. And so you have a very, very IP-intensive landscape that needs to be navigated. The sort of general categories here are platform technologies, tools, assays, reagents. The thing about these patents is that not only are there a lot of them, and there are a lot of them because you're trying to patent biology, modifying biology. Many of them have many years of patent term remaining, so it's something to be aware of, and it's something for companies to address. My advice is the earlier you start assessing and looking at these things, the better, so you can be prepared. Just quickly wanted to go through just some of the things to be aware of in a little bit more detail. From the very beginning, the drug discovery assay, what cells are you using? Is there IP around organoids, patient-derived tissue samples, 3D models? A lot of cell and gene therapy involves gene editing. So are you using CRISPR? Are you using Cas, TALENs? Are there patents out there that cover that? Yes, there are. So do you need to get a license in just the effort of discovering and identifying a potential drug target? The vector, is there IP or patents around the vector or the delivery agent? RNA, mRNA is obviously very, very hot right now. Lipid nanoparticles, big area, intense area of interest. Lots of patents to deal with in that space. Are the processes unique in terms of product manufacture, off-the-shelf plates, or is traditional or unique culture media being used? And with respect to cell lines, I put a box around this because it's something that it's an issue that comes up a lot with the companies that we work with. And a big question is, where did the cells originate from? Did they come from the ATCC? Did they come from a major university? Were they purchased from a company like Thermo Fisher? It's important to know what the origin of the cells are because there could be licenses or restrictions on the MTA that prohibit commercial activities. One thing I wanted to get out the way is that the generation of a deliverable that's owned by the company doesn't equate to freedom to operate. I think that's a misconception that a lot of younger companies have. So for example, if there's an antibody that's discovered as part of a technical package with a new CDR sequence and binding a target, there could be IP or patents around making that antibody. So for example, bispecific antibodies, you have companies like ABL Bio in Korea. Is there IP that covers the linkage of the two parts together? The knob and hole method, for example, is off patent, but there are a dozen of other methods for making bispecific antibodies that are under patent, so you should look at those. There's a lot of patents around cars, car production, chimeric antibody receptor, target proteins, plasmids. Are you using a helper plasmid? Is that helper plasmid proprietary to some other company? Are you using a particular vector, AAV, lenti? Most of the lenti patents are expired, but there are AAV patents that you need to be aware of and think about. REGENXBIO, for example, sued a company called Aldebaran on some AAV patents. So what we have here, just wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between patents and trade secrets. I think the key difference, at least in my mind, is that patents require you to disclose the innovative information. And basically, it can provide a blueprint for copying, whereas trade secrets, there's something that you keep secret. Patents are term limited. The limit is typically 20 years, whereas a trade secret is maintained in perpetuity. There are different costs. There are some costs associated with obtaining a patent. There's also, with respect to trade secrets, costs in maintaining the secrecy of the information. These differences impact the confidentiality provisions in agreements that you might form with a CRO. So for example, the confidentiality restriction. I mentioned 7 years, 14 years is something that you typically see. For a trade secret, does 7 years, 14 years make sense? Oftentimes, no. Courts have found that if you put a time limit on it, it actually is an indication that you don't intend to keep it a secret. So that can actually destroy your trade secret. Or the other alternative is, do you keep the length of the confidentiality restriction forever? That's also not good. Courts have found that to be indefinite and have stricken down those types of provisions. So coming up with a language that is protective of trade secrets is something to think about and to just be careful of, because you don't want to accidentally lose the IP that you're forming during the drug discovery process. Many of the companies that work with us don't have trade secrets to begin with. A lot of it is formed in their partnership with us. An important thing to think about is the ownership of that IP. In some instances, the IP may be an improvement on the CRO's background IP, in which case the CRO would obviously want to own that. So Sharon talked a little bit about the importance of trade secrets and protecting IP and how there's been an increase in that. There obviously have been laws that have been changed in the United States that have led to that, but I think it's also inherent to the new era of drugs and therapies that we're in right now with respect to cell and gene therapy and biologics. And the reason for that is that these are typically very, very complicated drugs. It's not a single substance. Typically, it's many related substances. And the secret sauce is actually in the process for making it. So there's a saying with respect to biologics: the process defines the product. So if you protect and keep the process secret, basically you can prevent others from also using and selling your product. These are some trade secrets that come up and are things to think about. Bioreactors. Have there been modifications made? Is there a new wrinkle to the process? Is a standard production method being used? And some of the most important ones are critical quality controls. In working with a CRO for development of a CMC package, for example, you could come up with physiochemical characterization methods, stability assays, purity and quality assays, out-of-spec requirements, GMP protocols. These are all things that are really, really important to maintaining the quality of the drug substance, and it's things that you should plan to protect as you work with a CRO. These aren't just hypothetical ones. These are ones that Genentech sued on against a Chinese drug company called JHL, where some former Genentech employees went to China, started their own company, took these trade secrets with them, and it's a case that Genentech was able to successfully win. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Genentech instituted different precautions, some of the precautions that Sharon talked about. In this day and age, I don't think I can do a talk without talking a little bit about AI and how it's also changing drug discovery. It's because there are some unique questions that are being raised with respect to protecting AI, patents versus trade secrets. And that's not only in terms of the algorithms that are being used, but also the data. You need to train the algorithms. And so with respect to data that's generated in a study with a CRO, who owns that data? Does the company own the data? Does the CRO own it? How do you protect that data? It's certainly not patentable, so trade secret protection might be the only option. Just one thing here about algorithms. Sharon talked a little bit about subject matter eligibility. Not something that you can typically patent in the U.S., and so what we've seen is for most companies that are in the AI machine learning space, you see protection in the form of trade secrets. So this is my last slide. Just wanted to talk about some factors to consider when trying to decide between a patent and a trade secret. It's actually a question that I consider a lot. It comes up in many different contexts at Charles River. And the question is oftentimes not easy. So one thing to look at is, does the innovation comprise the type of information that can be kept secret as part of your business? If the information is readily discernible from the product itself or by other appropriate means, trade secret protection would not be ideal. In that case, patent protection would probably be favored. How hard would it be to determine that another company is practicing your invention? You can file a patent, but if you don't know that your competitors are using it, the patent's no good. So with respect to AI and algorithms, if the algorithm is being run on a cloud server, and you have no idea where the server is, and the server's not publicizing the fact that it's using your algorithm, that would be something where you can file a patent, you've basically disclosed it to the public. In other words, you've given them a blueprint of what you're doing, but the patent's unenforceable. So that might be a situation where you would choose a trade secret over a patent. And like I said, typically with respect to algorithms, most companies are using the trade secret route. Is the innovation eligible for patent protection? There's some types of subject matter that are too abstract. And so many patent offices, including the U.S., don't allow patents on that. Would a patent be able to withstand an attack in litigation? If you believe the patent is likely too narrow in scope, you can get a patent, but if it's very, very narrow in scope, it's not really going to do anything. You can't keep competitors from getting into your space. If that's the only type of patent that you can get, again, obviously that's something that type of innovation is something that you might want to safeguard as a trade secret. And the last thing here is, how quickly will the invention become obsolete? If the invention becomes obsolete quickly, the length of protection the patents provide and the cost and effort to file the patent may not be worth the benefit. Any questions? In English, please. Back there.
Thank you for your presentation, and I have a question regarding the cell line IP matters. I think sometimes CMO may need to obtain some commercial license from the owner of the cell line to conduct the CMO business by commercially using their cell line. So in that case, then the company came and purchased the MCB made from the cell line. Then do you think that the original owner of the cell line forced the company to require commercial license to use the MCB for commercial purposes?
The typical situation, I think, is that if there is no IP over the cell line, the CRO doesn't look for anybody to provide a royalty to. Typically, that's not the case. There's the original cell line creator who may have authored a paper on it, and the paper published in 1991, but it's still proprietary to him. So that's something that you need to investigate and look at, and for that reason, it's sometimes difficult to sort of really identify if there are some IP issues with the cell line. When it's more easier, what you see are that CROs get a research use only license from the cell line owner. And you know, what we'll tell our partner companies is that we've only got research use only, so we can only take it so far. If you want to commercialize, you yourself are going to have to go back to the owner of that cell line and take out a license. And so as a drug developer, you need to think about what that cost is going to be and if it justifies the drug development. You know, there are different numbers out there that are sort of typical for a one-year license for a cell line for basically a company like us, and slightly different numbers for a company that's seeking to commercialize. We actually work with a number of Korean companies, and that's kind of a big question and a big issue. And frankly, we've seen them sort of back off of that area because just sort of seeing the downstream commercial license cost was something that didn't make a whole lot of sense for the company.
Thank you.
Thank you.